Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Critical Moves. Today, we're going to be interviewing Chris McElligott-Park, the CEO of Arcen Games. I'm joined today by Al.
Hey Jack, are you well? Chris, nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well. Thanks for having me.
Chris, as CEO of Arcen Games LLC, can you tell us a little bit about what it is that Arcen makes and the types of games that you're passionate about?
Sure. I kind of on the hook to make strategy games now. Because it's really, despite my early efforts to branch out, I that's more or less what people expect. So sometimes I'm content to make something else, but with a strategic twist. So usually what I wind up doing now, like the project I'm working on now, Heart of the Machine, blends in from a few other genres like RPG, and you could say visual novel, but not really. And you could say like city builder, but not really. And it's also 4X, but it's like most 4X and most RPG out of all the different things that it is. And so, um, my first game 16 years ago was AI War Fleet Command, and that was really just something I made for like my dad and my uncle and myself to play. I had been modding games and doing levels for games and all this sort of thing for, it's just a hobby for like 20 years at that point. And really hadn't planned on turning it into a career, but I kind of backed into that. And then it was like, well, this super toxic industry that I don't want anything to do with. It's 2009, and suddenly being an indie game developer actually looks like a profession that might actually be like an actual profession, like a thing that you can do. And because there were like five companies that made indie games and that were like Introversion, and there were a bit more than that, but like the ones that were visible, right? There were under 100 companies that were like routinely making a living doing indie games back then, and suddenly it was different. It's like, oh, this could be like an actual career. So I shifted into that, and it's great. It's what I had would have wanted to do, but that job didn't exist when I was a kid. Only the toxic version did. So for me, it's been Arcen as a matter of myself, and then Pablo Vega, the composer that I've worked with from the start. We're the two constants who are always here. And then there's been lots of other collaborators that we've worked with over the years, some of which have been staff, some of which have been contractors, recurring or otherwise. And then now with this latest title, working in partnership with Hooded Horse as a publisher. So I've worked with publishers before, but only for like regional retail stuff. So, or console releases, that sort of thing. So this is the first time working with a publisher from the get-go, like all the way through. So it's been a long and inconsistent ride. But I think that there's a certain kind of dry, kind of dark humor and certain like strategic edge to everything, and kind of a where the heck did that come from? This is a bit strange. Kind of like watching some British comedy shows or something where you're just like, what is happening here with the puppets and the weird, it's just me, like anybody not from that culture is just like, what's happening? I'm not British, and that's not the same thing, but I think it's that same flavor thing. They're like, oh, that's Chris. I have no, I'm not going to compare to myself to Hideo Kojima in any other regard, except for, you can tell it's a Kojima game because you're like, what does he like? The stuff that comes out of his brain is really specific to him. And I think that's true of anybody who's I mean, why do mushrooms make Mario big? What was Miyamoto thinking? Like, that's really cool. I love that mushrooms make Mario big, but like, there's not like a basis for that in anything. And so there's similar idiosyncrasies with my stuff. Some of which is from me, some of which is from working with collaborators like Keith Lamont and various others over the years. Who he has a great sense of humor and always really brought it there. So yeah, that's it's really hard to be succinct about what Arcen is. At the moment, it's just me, and it probably will just be me as far as staff goes. But there's always contractors and stuff in and out for different projects, and a community that brings in lots of everything from ideas and bug testing to like, hey, since you've made this partially open source, I've coded up a little thing. You could use it if you want to. And it's like, geez, this is really good. I will, and thank you, and I'm going to credit you, or they've written something, or whatever. And so, as quote unquote solo as I am at the moment, or have been at various points in the past, there's always just like this huge list of people that are involved. So,
just on that point, on starting Arcen, was there ever, what was your original mission or philosophy? Did you have that when you started, like this philosophy for where Arcen Games would go, what it would be? And has that changed since it started? 'Cause it's been, was it 2009? Is that about right?
Yeah, it's been 16 years. Well, when I first started, I was making, a game isn't done the year it comes out, right? So I was working on some stuff in 2008 and before, and I'd been working on a game engine since 2002, which is what my first game was released in. And then when I wanted multi-platform support, then we ported it to Unity in 2010. But initially, it was just like, there's no mission. Like there's, I'm making this game because I love strategy games, and my dad, my uncle, and I, it was before kids, right? My oldest is just about to be 15, so he's born in 2010. So for the decade before that, my dad, my uncle, and one of my uncle's colleagues and I, we'd get together and play 4-player strategy games every, Friday, Saturday, something like that. And we would wind up playing a game. We mostly wanted to play PvE, right? And so it was down to the strength of the artificial intelligence opponents, the NPC stand-ins. And basically, the AI was just usually so bad in any sort of game where we could play against them that by the time we really learned the game mechanics, which playing once or twice a week, 6 months at the outside is where you're there. And it's like, gosh, we're really good at this now, and AI can't keep up. And this was so fun to learn, and it's not fun to play anymore. Guess it's time to find another game. And so I'd be trolling through all these demos and, trying to find stuff. And then we really got into Supreme Commander, 2007, 2008, and we played that a lot. And then I was there. They included the source code in Python for their artificial intelligence. There was a guy that Saurian was his handle anyway, who was doing mods for that, and his Saurian's AI mod was like a really big improvement over the kind of base situation in Supreme Commander. So much so that they hired him to be the lead AI designer for Supreme Commander 2. He did an excellent job. But Saurian was releasing his mods, and then I was modding his mod because I thought it could be even better on that. And then I was like, you know what? I'm actually sick of working on this thing because there's only so good this can get. The fundamentals of this game aren't conducive to, and the language it's written in and all that sort of stuff aren't conducive to me getting this as good enough as much as it needs to be, right? So I was like, all right, well, why don't I just make my own from scratch then, and it's kind of Supreme Commander inspired, but let's put it in space. And let's make sure that it's a really interesting PvE situation that can keep us entertained for more than 6 months. And so that was it. That was meant to be a side project. I was working on another game project that I thought was going to be like a big thing. That actually released in 2012, I think, and has a mostly negative rating on Steam. Shattered Haven is the name that was the one that I thought was going to be really good. And then the side project wound up earning, like $2 million. And it was like, well, all right, then I clearly can't, gauge, what the primary thing is here. But, so that was pretty much it. And I certainly wasn't quitting the day job or anything like that. It was I was at that point I was the CTO at a software as a service software company, and which I'd been with for about 8 years. I started there in 2001, and so it was a matter of like in the summer of 2009. It's like, all right, well, let's try and see if this thing can sell. And then it kind of did. And then it was like, oh, we're able to get on Stardock. Okay, now it's like selling really well. Because Stardock had a storefront back then called Impulse. I realized that suddenly it was a confusing statement of get on Stardock. So we were like, what would Stardock do? Yeah, they had actually like a really good storefront. It was, they got bought by GameStop in 2014. That's all I'll say about that. But it's not around anymore.
Ruined.
Yeah. Yes. They ran that straight in the ground. So by being kind of a perennial, like periodic anyway, top seller on Stardock, that got that plus just kind of me pestering the press constantly, because that used to matter. Unlike now, it's all influencers. Back then, it was all like the gaming journalists and stuff. It's all flipped now. But by pestering them, hey, so-and-so, this is new, so-and-so reviewed it, this and that and the other, that it gained momentum. And then in December of 2009, it also managed to then get on Steam, which was like unheard of back then. I mean, it's like, far enough back that I have Gabe Newell's like signature on the contract sort of thing. Like it wasn't like an automated thing. And it was, it took a personal recommendation from like one big wig to another going like, hey, you should put these 5 games on, and mine happened to be one of them, And so in October of 2009, first game came out on Steam, and then it was like, all right, in December, it's like, all right, I think we can quit the day jobs. Let's try and do this. And then from that point, it was like, all right, well, let's just survive. Like, we know what we want to do, which is make games, and we have a wide variety of types of games that are interesting to all of us. And at that point, it was mostly me and Pablo, but there were some contractors for art and various things as well, and so there were a lot of kind of cross overlapping interests. So it was just like, all right, let's do what we can do to just make this an actual career. And like, I don't want to make AI War for the next 30 years of my life. It's a fun game, but this isn't the only thing I want to do forever. And so immediately then switched to trying to do a puzzle game, Tidalis in 2010, and that did not go well because I really misjudged the appetite in the market on Steam for that sort of thing. And, it was well enough received. I love the critical response of Suck It Bejeweled. That was my favorite one. But, ultimately, like, commercially, that was kind of neutral at best. It was like, oh, okay, well, I guess we're making more AI War expansions because people are constantly wanting more stuff, and they've got 300 hours in, they've got 500 hours in now. Let's they want more content, and then it just kind of grew from there. So in terms of like having a mission or having intentionality, I mean, initially it was like, let's make a game that I actually enjoy playing, and then let's make another one, and let's make another one, and let's not go out of business. And that's about it. And that, that's I think those are pretty good motivations overall. I think that resonates with a lot of people, because even if they don't like a game that I've made, or that the team has made or whatever, they know that I did, and that I didn't make it as like, well, this is copying whatever trend or something. They're like, that's weird and that's messed up. That's Chris. Interesting. Maybe I'll buy it as a token of support, or maybe I just will give that one a miss. But I've got, like, people. I don't have any expectations that like fans buy every last thing or something. But you get all sorts in terms of how they react when you go in a really different direction from what they've experienced so far.
I think it's a really solid philosophy to make, and we see it in the indie arena more than anything else. And here on Critical Moves, we are huge proponents for indie developers, because it's a passion project. It's something which someone is pouring not just their money into, but their heart and their soul, and they're making something that they want to play, that they would enjoy, and to hell with anybody who doesn't like it, because This is what I want to do. And that's where the best games come from. It's where someone's saying, no, this is my vision, this is what I want to do. And that seems to be the philosophy behind Arcen.
Yeah, I mean, that can massively backfire too. Like the most of Arcen stuff's been pretty well received. Like I said, one's been massively negatively received, and if you go by Steam ratings, a lot of the older ones from like the 2012, 2013 are kind of middling things. That was before Steam reviews existed, right? And so when those came out, I don't remember when Steam reviews came out, but back then it was like Metacritic was the big thing. And again, they were middling on that. It was like 60, 70, something like that. Like 80 was the ceiling for indie games back then on Metacritic. And so if you had like an 80 or an 82, that was like having 100 if you were a AAA game. And having like a 60 was like having like maybe a 75 if you were a double or AAA game, because, that was just the way it was scored. And because they couldn't, bear to, we're going to dock you for not having, AAA graphics or whatever in your, 2-person project. And so when you look at some of those older things in the context of the time, they were really well received by the audience they were for, and then everyone else was kind of baffled by it. And then a lot of them have really been kind of lost to time. Like, it's really hard to explain like why Skyward Collapse was a big deal for about like 2 months in 2013. Like, that was a game that came literally and accidentally right before the resurgence of the God game genre. And there hadn't been like a big God game for decades at that point. So Skyward Collapse was like the first one, and people were like, oh my God, it's so creative, blah, 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 blah. And, there was, it sold well and it had praise rain down on it. And then 2 months later, it was old news. And a lot of that had to do with a bunch of other God games came out. They were, in a lot of respects, better. Skyward Collapse was really creative, but it was a smaller project, and it's a thing that's not meant to be played forever. It's just meant to be like, hey, I'm going to have fun for 10 or 20 hours or something like that, right? And it was priced accordingly. It was like half or third the price of what we normally priced our games at the time. And so it was just kind of this is a concept piece, you know what I mean? And it's fun. It'll tickle your brain and get you to think strategically in a different way. The whole idea was I wanted to see if I could get players into brinksmanship with themselves. And turns out you can, and that's really fun. There was a review, I think it was Polygon or something. It was like, it's like playing chess against yourself, and you're always a huge asshole. And I was like, that's the best summary I could ask for that. Like, because the game is kind of trapping you into playing both sides against yourself, and you're the worst. And, that's not going to be something people are going to play for 300 hours, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. stuff like Raves that came out like a few months after that. And then it was like Goddess, Peter Molyneux's thing came out a little after. And that obviously did not go as anyone expected. But there was a lot of... You can get a lot of mediocre games, even if something's somebody's passion project. Like, for example, Skyward Collapse is a pretty cool thing to spend a little bit of time with. But I would say in the grand scheme of things, especially now, it's kind of mediocre, right? Like, it's an experiment in getting the player to get into brinksmanship situations with themselves. And it's a successful one. It's really interesting from that sort of perspective, if that interests you. But to the average player, they just want to sit down and play a game. And that's only going to have but so many hours of staying time for them, because they're not there for the kind of social experiment side of it, of like, and some of the ideas from it that originated from that were like, okay, now that I know that works, I can use that in other places. So I brought it forward into other titles in various ways. And so, I do think the indie space is where a lot of the more creative things come out. I do think there are some really creative things coming out of AA in particular, but also sometimes AAA. You get a lot of trend chasing and bland stuff in the indie space though too, because when you get a gold rush where people are like, we can make not just a living, but we can make like retirement money out of this. I'm gonna assemble my buddies and we're gonna make the biggest, trendiest thing, and there's like 1,000 teams doing the exact same thing. You get a lot of really bland stuff there too. So I mean, I don't even know if I would say like the ratio of like, ratios are kind of irrelevant. The total number of like super creative indies is really high. It's higher now than it ever has been. It makes me really happy. There's a lot of noise as well, which is annoying, but that's just a discoverability problem that everyone faces. So it's fine. But yeah, it's nice to see people get away from like the corporate overlord boardroom design sort of stuff.
I mean, you seem to have really exemplified that amount of freedom, right? I mean, you've spoken up to this point about how just by talking about your games, you're establishing this narrative that none of them really fit in the same genre. I mean, you've referred to in the past Starboard Rogue like an Isaac-like. You referred to you've made God games. You have strategy games akin to AI War back in 2009. So clearly, you don't have this like corporate overhead preventing you from making the things you want to do.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think of it more like a novelist, right? So specifically, a 90s novelist. So I don't know how much the general like listeners here know about like the history of publishing in, well, America in particular, but the English speaking world as a whole. But like a lot of it was like magazines and short stories and stuff, and then you could maybe spin that up into a novel in like the 70s and before. And then in the 80s there was this big push of like more novels. It was really kind of pulpy stuff, and there was a lot of especially in sci-fi and fantasy is what I'm referring to here. In sci-fi and fantasy there was a lot of stuff where publisher hands you a certain amount of money, like $30,000 in 1986 or something, right? And which would be like 3 times that now. And then it's like you write the book, and then hopefully you earn out, but you aren't gonna. And if you earn out, that means you start getting royalties from it. If you don't earn out, then what the publisher's just recouping their costs, and you were paid what you were paid. And then you write another book, and a lot of authors in the 90s started having a little more success, and they were referred to as mid-list authors, right? So you had the like the superstars, right? There's always superstars in any sort of thing, right? So they're selling millions and millions of copies, and you had the really like tiny ones who were like, well, let's give this person a shot and give them a really small like advance and see if they'll be anything. And then it's one book and they're gone. And then you had through the 90s, this growth of mid-list authors. There's a lot of really respectable names on there, and they were making a living or a little above a living by writing whatever they felt like. And their agent or their publisher might have something to say about like, well, I don't know if we want to buy a book about this particular topic. You're really known for books about robots. I don't know that we want to switch you to fantasy, and they're like, I'll take a pay cut, give me, if you can pay me 80% the usual rate and let me try fantasy, and they're like, well, I guess, so that was kind of this golden age for novelists. Right. And you could see them experiment. And the key thing is the voice of the author was always there. So even if it shifted genre or it's suddenly like weirdly tonally different from what you're used to from that author, a lot of readers would kind of go along with it because, well, the voice is there. So I know that's that author. That's their take on this thing. And so it felt like you have this connection because the underlying voice was always the same, even if it went wildly through genres and subgenres. And then what happened in the early 2000s was referred to as the death of the mid-list author. You can read all about that. And that basically meant that it went to pretty much only major tent poles and then like people who couldn't make a living off of it. And so the people who had been the mid-list authors in the 90s kind of disappeared. And so the way I look at the early 2010s is there were certain indies, myself among them, that were mid-list indies. This is the exact same model that we followed. It's exactly like the novelists in the 90s. And then we had the indie-apocalypse, which is the exact same thing as the death of the mid-list author. And it's now harder and more difficult, and there's a lower barrier to entry than ever before, but discoverability is also harder than before. And there are more people earning more than ever before, but also more people failing to earn enough than ever before. And I could be talking about either one of those industries right now. It applies equally to both book publishing and speaking of fiction and genre fiction in particular, and to indie games. And one of the big trends that is starting to reverse that in the 2020s for indie games only, not for book publishing, sadly, is the rise of the indie publisher. And that has changed everything. And so that is bringing back mid-list indies in a big way and is making certain things a little more possible than it otherwise would have been. So it's been I think that when you look at it kind of in the history of recent art mediums, creative mediums, there's a lot of similarities between various ones. Not so much in TV because it's such a huge production, or like movies, but when you look at things that can be done by a relatively few number of people, novels and indie games have a lot in common.
Chris, would you consider was it initially called Steam Greenlight? Was that the thing that they had where people could just self-publish their games on Steam? Is that similar in the way where an author can now self-publish on Amazon? Anybody can write a book, develop a PDF and stick it on Amazon and sell it. Is it similar? And is there a risk that, and you've mentioned about the barrier for entry has lowered significantly and discoverability has gotten harder. Is there a risk that some real gems are not being seen because of the mass of average?
Yeah. So Steam Greenlight was their first program, but it's very different from Amazon's situation and from the current situation on Steam. So Steam Greenlight started in, I want to say 2013, but they would pick 10 games a month. So you had to submit you could make a Steam Greenlight page, but you couldn't sell your game. And they would only publish 10 games a month. So, you're talking about 120 games a year. That's nothing, right? 120 games a day come out now, well, I don't know, a couple of years ago, it's more than that now. And so Greenlight was a pretty good program. It was labor intensive on Valve's part overall, but it opened the floodgates more. I mean, I remember, I had a lot of friends who were, or colleagues anyway, who, in the early 2010s, I was on Steam, so I was kind of a made man. I never knew if Valve was going to publish the next game or not. It was always a fingers crossed. Hey, we've got this thing. We put you to be on, right? And they said yes every time, but there was no guarantee. They never said they would. And so we would make the game, and it was like, I sure hope they do, because we're so screwed if they don't. And it was, but it was, I think I think the guys at Valve liked us and, liked that we were creative and what we were doing. So, but to my peers who were not on Steam, they would frequently get very dismissive and insulting comments from players who didn't know any better, who would say things like, your game looks really fun, let me know it's on Steam. And they're like, I'm dying for it to be on Steam. They say no, please let me in. And these were good games. They belonged on there. There was nothing that was extra special about mine versus theirs that meant I should get to make a nice living and they shouldn't. But that's what happened. It was not fair in my favor. Mm-hmm. And I recognize that, right? And Greenlight was Steam's way to try and start formalizing their selection process. And it was a good idea. And I don't really think there was any problems during the Greenlight period. It was such a low number of games being added that there were still a lot of people that got left out. That was a problem, obviously. But in terms of causing problems on the Steam ecosystem, I really don't think so. You did get people doing astroturfing campaigns to try and get extra, I'm gonna give you a free copy if you vote you want my game, that sort of thing, right? But then Valve, for reasons they never really explained, but I think we can all kind of guess why. They were like, all right, let's open this up more, and then they were like, all right, let's open it up even more, and then they were like, all right, we're doing, I think it's called Steam Direct or something, where if you've got $100, then you can have your game on Steam. That's it. That's what it costs, right? And so that meant that suddenly, and the weird thing is there is moderation, kind of, but somehow or other there's still a bunch of asset flips and stuff that are getting on there. I don't know who's approving those. It's really weird. To see a literal asset flip, you buy it, you don't change anything, you just upload it. That was a thing that was happening, and there'd be 40 copies of the exact same game that was downloaded from the Unity Asset Store or whatever. And well, that was puzzling, because everybody had been complaining about the Nintendo eShop and the amount of shovelware and stuff that was there. And this was worse than shovelware. And Valve's moderation tools took a while to catch up. And their discoverability tools in general really took a while to catch up. There was the whole Curator Connect stuff they were trying to do. And it just really didn't. It was a really good idea. And I think that if they had continued to develop it, that it would have worked out. But they went a different way. They will routinely, will have kind of closed door meetings where they ask indies and stuff hey, what's going on this year? What would be better? What challenges are you facing, et cetera, et cetera. And, some people would be invited over to talk about that, and other people would collect feedback from the rest of us. What do you want? What should we tell them about? And we'd all say, what we thought. And, Valve would listen to that as much as they wanted to, and they would make the choices they would make. And largely the choices have been really good. But there was a period where it was a flow rate problem. They couldn't make adjustments to their store quickly enough to catch up with the torrent of stuff that was coming on. And so discoverability really plummeted in the late 2010s. That is what it is. Their stuff has since caught up and things are much, much better. And that was like I guess I would chalk that up to kind of growing pains in a certain sense. Like it could have been avoided if Valve had made different choices in different ways, but that's neither here nor there. Like they were acting in good faith the whole time, right? And they were trying to do their best. So, that did, a lot of peers did not survive that transition period. So a lot of the companies that were ones that I would see a lot around in the early 2010s and before went out of business in that late 2010s shift. And honestly, before Hooded Horse approached me about doing a game with them, I was planning on just making smaller titles only, things that I could, make and put out in a year, and just, stuff that would be fun, but kind of bite-sized. Here, let's have 5 or 10 hours. Here's some neat new ideas. Let's play. And then on to the next one. This is not going to be something you're spending 500 hours with. And it's really only because of the partnership with Hooded Horse. I was like, all right, well, let's swing bigger again. It wasn't supposed to be this big. The one that I'm working on now is just gigantic. It's the biggest one I've ever made. And that was kind of on accident, but it's just how it happened.
Before Steam did the Greenlight program, I kind of want to go back to the beginning, which I know people probably are always wanting to talk to you about AI War, it being the big breakout success that it was for you at the start. I'm so interested, as somebody who cares primarily about the narrative perspective of games. Usually I'm driven to a game by either its music or the narrative more than anything. Al and I are both huge fans of sci-fi here at Critical Moves. We're like two of the people that won't shut up about it here on the podcast. So from a narrative perspective, setting AI War at a point in time that AI has already won the conflict and taken over the galaxy, and you are now playing as the, rebellious faction of humans left alive, or faction left alive in the galaxy to try to, and the subversion of the mechanics to fit that narrative cohesion, the idea of playing a strategy game where the goal isn't to expand too quickly or isn't to fight as much as possible or to build as many units. I mean, it's interesting. And I'm sure everybody talks to you about that. But from a narrative perspective, it's so intriguing. How did you come up with that concept and then decide that you wanted to fit a game there? And what came first, the game mechanic or the point in time in which, like the narrative in which you built around it?
So there were a lot of things in progress all at one time. And so I've written about kind of my design process before and talked about it. And generally, I don't do the design documents thing. I mean, I will make a design document, don't get me wrong, but I don't think that they need to be too detailed, except when there are exceptions. But overall, like the really important thing about making a game, in my opinion, is you need to have some immutable design goals. That's what I refer to them as, right? Immutable. They will not change. And those usually have to do with emotion. And if you break the immutable design goals, you are no longer making the same game. You've messed up. You can switch, make another game, but, these won't change. So for AI War, it was like, I want to feel like Ender Wiggin. The parts of Ender's game where he is fighting against the Formics and he's always outnumbered, but he has to be smarter and so forth. How do you make that happen? I didn't know exactly, but I knew I wanted to have something, I also wanted to, you have to go back in time a little bit to 2000, late 2008 as well. And one of the things, so like I said, we're switching strategy games like every 6 months, right? And that was deeply frustrating because there would be an innovation in one game where it was like, oh, here's this thing where like there's, I don't know, like in not Rise of the Middle Kingdom. What was that one called? Rise of Nations. Like in Rise of Nations, it was like, oh, you've got these towns and they have these cool mechanics to them. And then you've got these squads. And if one of the guys in your squad of 3 dies, then that's not just like the health is down and a visual thing, but like you're actually down a man. And so that was really interesting, right? And then it's like, okay, well, we hit the end of Rise of Nations. We can't really do that anymore. We're too good to play it against the computer now. So on to the next thing. And all those innovations are just kind of lost. They're not in any other, like, I still can't think of any other games that I've seen that have done some of the stuff that game was doing. And so it's just kind of like, and the big thing with like Supreme Commander was, one, it's got a ton of units. Well, that's very compatible with the whole I want to feel like Interwigan thing, right? And then 2, it had like an infinity zoom map where you could see the mini map. That was one thing, but you could also just zoom in and out and you could see the entire battlefield and it would shift to icons, or you could zoom all the way in. And that was such a breath of fresh air versus having to, like, I don't know, switch to a different view to see something else, right? So it's like, all right, that I can't let go of because that is just so cool. And I know Total Annihilation did it first, obviously the same developers as Supreme Commander, but outside of that series, that really wasn't a thing back then. And so it's like, all right, I want to take some of the best mechanics that I think are underrepresented in the strategy genre in the 2008 time period, and I want to bring those into there so that it plays just like I want it to feel. You know what I mean? And then I want to feel like Interwigan, and it's going to be in space, and let's see. And it didn't make any sense to me to program AI early. So it was all PvP between like my dad, my uncle, and I first. And that was actually really interesting because it was a good experience for me to like learn what was fun and what was not fun and that sort of thing. Or like, there were things like originally the gravity wells were infinite, right? You could just keep going way out. So the best strategy was to take your ships way on out and then just have like mass drivers like just hurling stuff from further away. And it was like, all right, so that doesn't work. These ships need to have range because otherwise you just get infinity sniped from out of nowhere as soon as you come into a planet. There was originally a thing where, kind of like with Ender's Game, where the planets, there wasn't a galaxy, there was a galaxy map, but there wasn't a wormhole network back then. So it was like when you were sending like a carrier between planets, it would give you an estimated time, how long it would take to get from that location to the other. And then that carrier and its ships it was carrying were just gone for that amount of time. You could see, all right, this is going to be emerging in 3 minutes or whatever. And your opponents couldn't see that at all. They just knew your ship had gone, but they didn't know where you were headed or anything like that. And that was kind of interesting, but it led to all these problems like, just this endless cat and mouse. And it was just, that was fun for a little while, but it wasn't the sort of, it was like, this isn't going to last 6 months, and we're still playing PvP. And, I was thinking about it, I'm like, let's suppose that I make an AI opponent that can play as well as we do at this. It's just going to be this again, except we're playing against the exact same thing. That's like the best case scenario. And realistically, it's going to be worse at it than us. So what am I even doing here? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, trying to replace one of us, the whole thing is we don't want to play against someone like us. It's just not very fun. So it's like, all right, well, not quite sure what to do. Let's keep developing the mechanics and so forth. And it was like, hey, actually, like, this whole jumping between star systems thing, that's very much like in Ender's Game, the book, right? But it meant that anybody could show up anywhere at any time. There were no walls or borders. You had to I think you couldn't make a line between stars, but you could jump between a couple of them. So you had no way, there's no walls in space. It's one of the chief issues of a lot of space games. It's like the huge advantage of terrestrial strategy games, regardless if they're sci-fi or what, is you can have a freaking wall or a mountain or a body of water or anything, something to go around. Like, other than just like hiding on the dark side of a planet, there's nothing in space, right? But various games like Sins of a Solar Empire and the AI war, and I think Stellaris is the same thing. And, when you have jump lanes or wormhole networks or whatever, now you have walls because you can guard a jump lane, and the only place that somebody can come into your local planetary grav well is at that jump lane point, so you can guard it. So it's like you've got a wall with gates in space finally, right? And so that makes things way more strategic. When everything's just a big blank void, it's really difficult to make it interesting. Homeworld does it by having really detailed like 3D representations of things, and then like Nebulous Fleet Command and some of the other ones like that do it by having like really detailed like ship to ship combat elements where it's kind of like naval battle where you're in a big void, it's the ocean, but you can make a naval battle interesting by really focusing more details on like the ships and its armaments and what exactly is firing, multiple weapons on a ship firing, that sort of thing. And that's very far away from Supreme Commander, so that wasn't going to work here. So through the combination of like, okay, these are the things that don't work. These are the bits that don't look like an elephant. It's like the old joke, right? Like, how do you carve an elephant? You chip away all the parts that don't look like an elephant, And so I always have that sort of thing in mind. I mean, this doesn't look like an elephant to me. Like, that could work, but that doesn't look like that doesn't serve the immutable design goals. It doesn't further my aims. So I had this kind of moment of feeling really stuck back in March of 2009. I was like, the mechanics are good, feels good to play, but it's not really fun, and I don't really feel motivated to start working on the AI for it because the best it could possibly be is a pale imitation of us, and that's just, even if it was a perfect imitation of us, it's not good enough. It's just not interesting. And so I started thinking about it, and I was like, all right, well, asymmetry is interesting. That hasn't really been done a lot. And then I was like, a lot of what I would be spending the most time on is stuff like the economy of the AI, and all that stuff's invisible. And that's part of what strategy games, most of them, in the 2000s in particular, would get away with, right? Because you can just, because of the fog of war and the fact that you can't see the economic numbers of like, okay, a villager cut down some logs and dragged them back over the hut or whatever. If they get like a 200% bonus or something on their amount of wood pile increases, you can't tell. I mean, you can check the code if that's available, or you can like check a replay and go, yeah, they deployed way more than they had. Like if you analyze it or have like a recording, then you can figure it out. But unless they tell you, those are referred to as cheating AIs, right? That was the term back then in particular. And so usually it'd be like, if there's like 5 difficulty levels, first 3 just get progressively smarter, and then number 4 and number 5 would be the cheating AIs. That was just kind of the standard back in the 2000s. And I was like, what's interesting though is that humans and AIs are really good at different things. Like we have almost opposite strengths and weaknesses of what we're good at and poor at doing. And trying to make these poor AIs play like a human is just really setting the AI programmers up for failure, which in this case would be me. and so it's kind of like, all right, well, from a game design standpoint and from like a player perspective, I don't care about the enemy's economy. Like if I blow up an economic, thing of theirs, I want to see a result. Absolutely. Like if I blow up a depot that's theirs, I want to see that they're debuffed. You know what I mean? But like the intricacies of their economy, I don't care. I care about the intricacies of my economy as the player. That's where I'm looking, right? And so I was like, all right, well, I could actually skip a lot of economic simulation for an enemy AI because nobody cares. It's all invisible anyway. And so if we're just like, assume that it's working and let's just focus on the tactics of this here. And I was thinking about chess, and I thought back about, like some chess tournaments I've been to where there's situations where like there's like a grandmaster who will play like 80 people at a time or 50 people or whatever, right? There's like a ring and everybody's got a chessboard set up, and the grandmaster just walks around, and as they walk, sometimes they won't even break stride. They will make a move on each board that they pass. And they win all of them because they're playing against people who are good chess players, but they're not like grandmasters. And when they have to pause for a second instead of like just striding along, then you know that you've made a good move. And then once all the games are progressed enough, the grandmaster will choose someone to let win, and they get a little bit of a prize. And to me, that says, okay, the grandmaster has no working memory for these 50 or 80 or whatever it is games. They can play any number of these games because as they walk up, they know what's happening and what should happen based on the board state alone. They don't need memory. They don't need to remember what happened or have intention or anything. They just walk up, see what's going on, make a good move. And I was like, all right, well, that's an interesting premise to think about from a tactical AI perspective. Like, what if the economy is just completely unlike yours, but it plays fair tactically? But it's playing like a chess grandmaster where it doesn't necessarily need to remember things or all that sort of stuff, right? So that's how all that wound up coming to be. It's just like, all right, well, yeah, it would really further my aim of feeling like Interwigan if I'm facing off a way more formidable foe that I can see from the start. You know, like I need to be able to see targets and strategically evaluate them and scout them and things like that, right? And then if they're not really aware of me, but they have certain rules about how they're able to reinforce and stuff, and if I'm able to do economic raids on them that cause them economic losses, it doesn't matter if they're not following the same rules as me. It just matters that it's equitable or interesting. It's really equitable. Even doesn't even really matter. It just needs to be interesting and a good challenge, and not feel like a cheating AI, even though it's playing by asynchronous rules, right? So that meant all of the logic to make it really feel good went into like the tactical and kind of the mid-level strategic layers, and then that from the AI's perspective, like all of the really big strategic decisions for the most part were kind of automated rules that the player could kind of pick up on. So the player could exploit that knowledge of how reinforcements are going to work and this sort of thing, so they know where to raid and how to break things down. So the players could weaponize that knowledge against them, and it wound up making it so that the AI was doing all the things that an AI is really good at, and the humans were doing all the things that a human's really good at, and neither side was put at an inherent disadvantage.
I always think about AI in terms of players always, and you mentioned it earlier about cheating AI, and players always want, well, it depends. Do players want a fair AI or just an AI that feels fair? And that can be, it's nuanced, but there can be a difference there. And it's almost like you're removing the concerns around fairness by saying this is an entirely different AI. It's not trying to impersonate a human player like Saurian. It's an entirely different concept.
And I think that's important because I think that's the key to having a good AI opponent. Back when Mario Sunshine came out, this is a weird thing to bring up, but there's some levels in Mario Sunshine where enemy called Shadow Mario shows up, and he has your exact same moveset and can navigate the level like you, and he's either chasing you or you're chasing him, something along those lines, right? And it was kind of neat. It was the first time something like that had ever happened in a Mario game, and it was different, you know, but they did it like 5 times out of like whatever, 120 stars or whatever they had, right? And so used sparingly, that was kind of neat. And I had the thought back in 2008, you know, this human impersonation thing is kind of like if every game is like all your enemies are going to be Shadow Mario only forever. It's like, that's boring as hell. Why are we doing that? And The other thing is, I did a lot of modding and stuff for first person shooters, and one of the things that's really funny about first person shooters is how much they cheat in your favor, because humans are good at different things. If you wrote a true AI for any first person game, then what it would do is it would just be one guy and it would body everybody. So it doesn't really matter what the world is, what the game is. I don't care. Pick any shooter ever. You have one AI. It just stands where it is. And then as soon as you come into range, it headshots you and we're done. That's it. It's just endless headshots. There's nothing to make it so that it can't do that. As soon as you reveal yourself, headshot, you're done. Because it's got perfect aim. Any non-perfect aim that's happening is the developer jogging the elbow. You could say, well, they need to move around and try and find you or something. Not really. They can just stand in a big open area. They've got way better vision than you do. If there's rules about cover or something, that's fine. But as soon as you step out of cover, they immediately are going to notice, right? Even if you've got view cones and stuff like that, they can look really quickly because they're very fast. So if you've got a view cone, that's an artificial restriction, but that's fine because it mirrors ours. But the speed at which they would just stand there twirling, right? If there's a view cone, because they don't need more than one frame to see you, right? So that's even footing against a first person shooter AI. So there's no such thing as a non-cheating first-person shooter AI. They just all cheat in your favor because we have literally no hope, not even close. Same thing with billiards. If you're playing it against a billiards AI, as soon as it takes a shot, it clears all the pockets immediately because it can calculate all the physics. Why wouldn't it clear the table every shot? So you don't even get to play. It's just, it goes first, clears the table, we're done here. Or you take a shot, now it has a couple of, turns, and then it just utterly wipes you. So in other genres, and that's what made me realize, okay, hey, we're not making AIs. That's not at all what we're doing. This is not AI in the sense of it is in a broad sense. It's a subcategory of it, but it's not like it's a magic trick, right? And so in a first-person shooter, the job isn't to win, because it would easily. There's no reason for squad tactics or grenades or anything, just endless headshots. And so everything else is for your benefit, to make it fun so that you can do interesting things. You can ambush somebody and break a squad, and the guys panic and whatever, and some other guy flanks you, and that seems oh so smart, and so forth. But that's all an illusion for your benefit, because they don't need to do any of those things because they are superhuman in the very literal sense. And so I thought, all right, well, strategy games as a whole don't work that way. I mean, chess does now. I mean, it's basically grandmasters can hardly ever win now. But the outside of a very constrained rule set and supercomputers, strategy games don't work that way. So, but what if they did? What if it was a magic trick and we leaned into the aspect of the magic trick? Not how is this AI better, or how is it simulating a human more? Why simulate a human? Why is it always Shadow Mario? Show me something that feels like an alien, or an AI, or like an artificial intelligence itself, like something not me, and have it do things for my benefit. Have it sneak around when it doesn't have to. Give it rules that make it so that it's constrained in unusual ways. Give it superior forces and have it so it has to patrol and has to do this and the other sort of thing. So it's rule bound. It's kind of like honor bound not to do certain things, like the same way that the first person shooter ones are honor bound not to just headshot you as soon as they see you. So you could put it that way, right? And that's, you get an interesting thing because now the player has stuff to look at. They're like, all right, there's trade lines going here, and there's a depot there, and I can do this and I can do that, and this is my window of opportunity to ambush them there. And all of that comes about not because you're trying to make a smarter human stand-in, because a smarter human stand-in doesn't really play that way. Most people aren't that fun to play against, right? I mean, like, a lot of RTSs boil down to like 15-minute rushing matches, right? It's really hard to turtle or boom against other humans at any competent level of play. So even if you wanted to emulate them, and even if you could, most people wouldn't find those sort of opponents to be fun. So it's much more interesting to have a more complex opponent that has multiple weaknesses and kind of almost is inspired by other genres, whether it's first-person shooters or like action-adventure games where it's like, oh, there's the glowing eye, that's a weak spot, or here's the boss attack patterns, and you can learn their patterns and you can figure out when to do what, that sort of thing, right? And why not apply that to strategy games in the aggregate? You know, these are squads and things instead of being like one like giant dude in armor from like Dark Souls or something. And at the time I was really into Demon's Souls, and found that to be really interesting as well in terms of just how it could evoke emotion through mechanics alone without much story. And so that's been kind of my ethos ever since. I'm a magician. I'm here to put on a show for you, and that's it. That's my job. It's my job to entertain the player, which can mean a variety of different things depending on the player. Some of them really like getting smashed and trying to break through the impossible wall. That's fine. Most people aren't really into that. Most people want like a reasonable challenge that they can kind of figure out on the fly. But then once it's been 6 months, they're like, I'm too good for this now because I see all the patterns that I've been shown and I know what to do. So they're ready to go up to the next level. And it's like, all right, well, there needs to be a little bit more challenge and some new patterns or whatever. It's like, whoo, it's fresh again. It's been 6 months. This is when I would normally exit from a strategy game that I've been painstakingly learning. But now instead I've gone up a difficulty level. It's like a whole new game again, but it's the same game. And then, you can kind of repeat. And usually people only graduate so many levels up because they hit a point where it's like, I could play higher, but that would require constant, intense focus for the entire time that I'm playing. And that doesn't sound like a good time to me. So I'm going to be a little more relaxed. I'm going to be a little more sloppy. And I'm going to play on this level. And if I lose a little bit, I'm going to roll with it, and that's where most people wind up. That's where I wind up most of the time too.
Sorry, everyone. We're out of time for this episode of Critical Moves, but please come back next week to listen to the conclusion of this interview with Chris McElligott-Park. And in the meantime, don't forget to check out criticalmovespodcast.com for all the ways to get involved. That includes hyperlinks to our Discord, our forum, information about the team, and lots of ways so that you can get involved and ask us to interview the people that you'd like and talk about the topics that you'd like to hear about. So please, everybody, tune in next week, and thank you so much.